towards autonomous ships, flag state involvement and the regulatory aspects. Essentially, the IMO, interim guidance for mass trials, MSC 1 Circular 1604, made it very clear that flag states have prime responsibility for the safe operation of mass. That's maritime autonomous surface ships, as you all know. Jurisdiction of vessels obviously determined by UN Convention of the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS, and outlines the responsibility of various flag states. Generally consider there are 4 main pillars for maritime regulation. They're SOLAS, MARPOL, SDCW, and MLC. There's also several other relevant conventions, load line, coral wake, ballast water, various liability and compensation conventions. And also such things as search and rescue. There already is provision for alternative designs, exemptions and equivalences in various conventions. And that essentially means that quite a few things, although some people say, oh, all the regulations will have to change, actually quite a lot can be accommodated within the current regulations. Right. Yeah. So what I'll do, I'll just quickly run through the various regulations and things, and give a basic outline of where the exemptions and equivalence arrangements can be found. Then I'll do a little bit on the current codes that exist that already could facilitate the move towards autonomous ships, and then hopefully be finished in time for a few questions. Anyhow, SOLAS, the chapter 1 general, does give exemptions for vessels which embody features of novel kind from certain chapters, 2.1, 2.2, 3 and 4. Basically, that's to enable research into development of such features. That essentially does mean it is sort of more or less for one-off type situations for developing ship types, but that fits nicely with the development of mass vessels. Construction, basically in there is exemption for vessels, especially those not proceeding more than 20 miles from nearest land, if the administration considers the sheltered nature of the conditions of the voyage make the application suitable. Again, several of the initial autonomous vessels do tend to be the smaller ones working close inshore, and yeah, that could be a possibility there. Life-saving appliances, obviously, as we get towards autonomous ships and possibly unmanned ships, there'll be less requirement for life-saving appliances because there'll be less people on board. I must admit, the little on the photograph here, the little 4-person lifeboat I thought was quite interesting on this one, with a vessel with only 4 crew on. So obviously there will be a potential reduction in LSA, but while there are still possibly going to have to be people going on board, even if it might just be for arrivals, departures and things, there will need to be some kind of life-saving appliances on board. Radio communications in chapter 4, obviously communication is one of the key things for autonomous vessels, and this particular chapter has evolved over the years now with GMDSS and satellite communications and everything. Basically, yes, there are the possibilities for enabling communication. And of course, if the persons controlling the vessel don't necessarily have to be on the vessel, then they can be sitting in a control room somewhere else. They have exactly the same radio communication. After the next slide, please. Yeah, then chapter 5, basically this chapter applies to all vessels, even the very small ones, and safety of navigation. This is now developing and over the years again has developed to incorporate the likes of automatic radar plotting and electronic charts as they are now coming in, long range identification, AIS, various things. And yes, basically this chapter reasonably well has been keeping pace with technological developments. And we get to chapter 6 on cargoes. Again, the monitoring of cargoes when they're on board will probably present some challenges for autonomous vessels, but again, certainly like with liquid cargoes and things, the actual tank levels and that can very easily be transmitted to a shore, and alarm systems in place and everything. Dangerous goods, again, the monitoring of them can be done remotely. We may get to the initially problems of public perception of vessels carrying dangerous goods, and that should they really be going around with reduced manning or no one on board. And of course, there is chapter 8 for nuclear ships, which as yet hasn't really taken off, but who knows in the future. Then we get to management of safe operations and the ISM code and everything like that. Again, the requirements of the ISM code can fairly easily be adapted to suit an unmanned vessel. Obviously, the responsibility of the master, whether or not he's located on board the ship, will present a few interesting things for how the actual development goes. But there's nothing in the ISM code to say that you do have to have a manned vessel. And various other ship types, high-speed craft. Again, my feeling is probably high-speed craft won't go too far down the autonomous route yet. Although having said that, of course, these kind of vessels already have essentially bridges where it's more like an aircraft cockpit, and plus the chief engineer tends to sit on the bridge with the master and everything. So the actual control of the vessels is somewhat near the way that things are going with autonomy. Then there's a special chapter on bulk carriers following the landing of several of those. And then chapter 8 is regards verification. Of course, autonomous vessels may present a few interesting challenges for surveyors going on board when there's no one to meet them potentially and things. But again, there's nothing in that that can't be overcome with a bit of imaginative thinking. Next slide, please. Yeah, then MARPOL, this again applies to all ships, and all the pollution prevention aspects, for example, like with oil, with monitoring discharge and everything, that can all be done remotely. I think again we'll have the public perception thing of if we're going to sort of unmanned gas carriers and things, it might not be very acceptable initially until technology is proved, but yes, we'll have to start somewhere. So I think probably the noxious liquid substances thing will be a while before we have to worry a bit too much about that. Packaged goods, again, there's not too much difference there. Sewage, of course, that if there's no people on board, there won't be any sewage, but again, there will need to be provisions for when maintenance crews come on board, or indeed if you need people on board for pilotage. Garbage, again, if there's still people living on board, or certainly with reduced numbers on board, there's going to be less garbage. What there is, of course, will still have to comply with the requirements. And Annex 6 on air pollution. Again, potentially the designs that autonomy will allow will have less air resistance, maybe better hydrodynamic performance, things like this. So hence they'll be using less power, which will in turn reduce the air pollution. But again, we should be able to comply with the with the requirements, NOx and SOx and things. Okay, next slide, please. SDCW, of course, this is an interesting one if we're on the full hog to unmanned ships, because then you haven't got anyone on board doing it. However, I guess it'll be some time till everything is completely autonomous, so someone somewhere will be controlling. So it may be that it's a shore control station alerted by alarms or whatever, or even in the initial stages on board the ship, rather than having the lookout posted at all times, it may be an automatic lookout that alerts someone when something's seen. So hence, SDCW will need to be amended a bit. Let's say we already have alternative certification, and yes, we'll need to look into what skills are required for people who are monitoring autonomous systems, especially in terms of the link between the autonomous and the humans taking over, and also making sure that any video, audio presentation to the officer of the watch and master is certainly of a standard equal to that you'd get by actually being on board the vessel. Next slide, please. Coral regs, again, in here there is a, from the lights and shapes and things, there's consideration for special construction vessels that do allow slight exemption from certain requirements, basically provided what is in place is as similar as possible to what the coral regs say. Obviously, Rule 5 on lookout, it's quite a critical one for reducing manning and going to full autonomy. But the whole development of optical sensors and things is getting well, very advanced now, and certainly it's looking like it will be possible for machines to recognize things as time goes on. But again, a lot of testing will be needed just to make sure that they are at least as reliable as the human. I think probably the good thing there with any form of automatic lookout or whatever, at least it's not going to get tired and potentially start nodding off when it's standing on bridge wing, because you do it all the time. Also, you have potential for much better all-round lookout using sensors. Risk of collision, action to avoid collision, are all fairly well tried and tested over the years. I mean, there are some people who seem to be saying that autonomous vessels will need to have a special signal or anything. I must admit, my feeling is no, because basically they need to be programmed to react in accordance with the coral regs, which is relatively simple to do. I guess maybe one problem might be that any autonomous ships will actually do exactly what the rules tell them to do, whereas the human ones they're interacting with may not. Next slide, please. Load line, again, has a couple of provisions for exemptions and equivalence. Load line, not a huge influence, I think, from the autonomy thing. Obviously, some of the requirements for things like guardrails and such like that come under load line. If there's no people on board, you wouldn't actually need them. Well, of course, you would need to consider the fact that potentially there are people going on board in port, or again, maybe for pilotage and that. So yes, appropriate arrangements will need to be made to ensure their safety. Ballast water management, that again is reasonably automated already. There may be challenges with systems like where filters need changing, where UV lamps need changing and such like. But again, possibly be dealt with by suitable redundancy. And plus, of course, ships are now getting designed to carry less and less ballast water. And so if you can do away with the ballast water, then you don't have to worry about it. Maritime Labour Convention, of course, if there's nobody on board the ship, then you wouldn't actually need a Maritime Labour Convention certificate. But in the meantime, you will need some flexibility as to ensure that well, the people who are controlling the vessels are still treated properly. This would potentially yes, need some form of changes to the convention, because it does very much deal with people actually on board ships. Whereas here we probably need to make sure that the conditions for people controlling them from ashore are certainly equivalent. We don't want people, essentially, if someone in control of a ship is in a shore control station, we don't want them working ridiculous hours and potentially going asleep and causing all the same problems we sometimes have on short manned vessels. Next slide, please. Liability, obviously there will be some challenges from the insurance perspective of such things as, oh, maybe there's not a master on board who is going to take responsibility for things. But again, it shouldn't be unsurmountable. Carriage of passengers and luggage. Again, this may be something that'll be a while before we have a fully autonomous passenger vessel. But of course, we're already seeing little potential automated foot ferries and such like in Scandinavia, although they're obviously below the size for needing the liability under the convention at the moment. Yeah, maybe these will get bigger. Bunker oil pollution and wrecks, so of course, are still possible, but you will still need the insurance cover for it. Search and rescue, the here there'll again be need to be changes, but because however, it's possible that autonomous ships may actually be able to be quite well used for this sort of thing, with provided you've got the video technology to be able to see what can be seen from the ship. When it comes to actually rescue of people, there's getting little autonomous life buoys and things being developed now, and search and rescue organisations are already using drones to assist with the search and rescue. So again, it's just moving with the times. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll now just go through one or two of the sort of code aspects, especially Caribbean Small Commercial Vessel Code. Most countries and regions do have some form of codes and regulations for the smaller vessels. Of course, it's the kind of thing where autonomy and autonomous vessels will come in first, the smaller stuff. I say Caribbean Small Vessel Code is fairly typical of these, with the various chapters: construction, freeboard machinery, fire protection, life-saving, operational requirements, accommodation, and a bit on licensing of the boatmasters and engineers. Actually, in the code, we have mentioned autonomous vessels and some of the things that need to be considered. In general, there's nothing, sort of no specific regulations as such. I'm just recommending you follow the latest guidelines from the industry, and noting that control of the vessels will probably rest with people not located on board. Therefore, they'll probably need exemptions from certain parts of the code because they won't actually have any accommodation and things. Also, it mentions that any operations will need to be fully risk assessed, and you need the agreements between the ports involved. And if they're operating, notices to mariners need to be put out just to warn other mariners, certainly at the initial stage, while autonomous vessels are fairly novel. And although the actual vessel manning as such won't be required if there's no one on board it, there will need to be some form of control of the people who are controlling the vessel. There may also, of course, need to be special consideration, bilateral agreements and such like, where vessels are being controlled outside the territory where the vessel is. But basically, the Caribbean SCV code already has bilateral arrangements in it. Have the next slide, please.
Chris, you have about 5 minutes, please.
Yep. Okay, look, I think I'm just about there, I think. Then I just thought I'd go through the REG yacht code. I mean, in some ways it seems rather strange whether yachts would actually be autonomous. But on the other hand, a lot of these super yacht owners do like the latest technology and modern toys and that. And there could be advantages of reducing manning, certainly on the technical side. Probably they're still going to want service, although maybe they'll have robots servicing them, the very recluse owners or whatever. Basically, RG Yacht Code does have, it is an equivalent arrangement effectively to IMO standards, but within the code, there are the possibilities of equivalent standards. Part A is basically for yachts under 12, Part B, 12 passengers, sorry. Part B is 12 to 36 passengers. And then the annexes are the bits that are the same, basically the same for both the under 12 and the over 12 vessels. Have the next slide, please. As I said, yes, the flexibility in the code. There's bit 1.7 in interpretation, and there's equivalent arrangements, alternative design, exemptions, and similar in Part B. Again, with all these, they do have to be go through an approval system with the flag state. Next slide, please. Basically, when you're applying for equivalence, something does have to be equivalent. You can't just say, oh, there's a requirement for navigation lights. I'm not going to have any. There has to be, oh, but we do need to do them slightly differently. Essentially, where necessary, there might need to be testing of what is being proposed, and also engineering analysis evaluation, and then it's got to be approved by the administration. Classification societies, recognised organisations do get involved at the early stage of this, obviously with the shipyard. Next slide, please. And exemptions can only be granted by the administration. So once the applications have to go to the administration. And as flag state, we can only grant exemptions in accordance with what is in the international conventions. We don't like granting exemptions. Equivalence, yeah, is reasonable. Exemptions, yeah, hopefully we can avoid. And also it tends to be with MARPOL, there isn't very much option for any exemptions. Basically, thou shalt not pollute. And next, please. Yeah, here's just a quick example of the kind of forms of paperwork that we go through when we are looking at equivalence. And next, please. Yeah, that's just the rest of the form. And the next one, please. Yeah, there's a bit more there. I'm afraid I'm just having a slight technological problem in my screen is doing funny things at the moment. However, next slide, please. Yeah, I think one thing with autonomous vessels, yeah, if all the vessels obey the call regs correctly, then we stop having collisions. But in the meantime, the possibilities of automated systems to prevent collisions and things is very much there. We've already seen it with obviously the advent of radar and such like, has in general reduced the accidents. Although of course with new systems being introduced, you also tend to get new problems. You get radar assisted collisions and such like. But yeah, something which again, any new systems being introduced do need rigorous testing, and we do have to aim to continue to make things better rather than take any backward steps. And the next slide, please. I think that's about it. So there's plenty of opportunity to develop autonomous ships within the current constraints. Sorry about the slight typo here in the middle of this. I only just noticed that last night. That there's a bit of a cut and paste problem here, and Promote got this right, got in there accidentally. And essentially, developments helping shipping to continue as a safe, economically viable, and environmentally friendly industry for the transport of goods and people. Right, thank you very much.